A wonderful good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today, which addresses sustainability and the patent strategy. I have the great pleasure to welcome here today on the call Professor Sheetal Menon. Our other speaker, Ms. Waxman, has apparently been prevented. I understand that Israel is currently under massive attack, and I know that she has been several times during our calls been forced to go into a shelter. So this may be an explanation. I hope it is not this explanation. I hope it is something pleasant, like something nice. But we have so far not been able to locate her. So we may just be doing, Dr. Minon and I, this webinar today, which talks about sustainability and patent business strategy. For those who don't know me, I'm Oya Gaffele. I am the founding director of OxFirst. OxFirst has been running now for 13 years. It's a spin-out from the University of Oxford, and it focuses on economic aspects of various forms of intellectual property and has a particular interest in patent business strategy, in offering litigation and licensing support, and providing insights on damages, and especially on standard essential patents and the determination of fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory licensing rates. OxFirst has as its mission to support humanity towards a better path by leading through innovation and technology and helping companies, not-for-profit, governments, international organizations unleash the value of intellectual property by understanding better the economic and managerial underpinnings of technology, by assessing the patent rights and copyrights and other forms of intellectual property. The talk that we have organized today is of particular interest to me personally. I think that there's a big revolution happening in terms of the need of business to assume responsibility towards society. There has been a big move towards corporate social responsibility, towards the need to embrace net zero goals, the need towards understanding how business contribute to promote sustainability and the long-term protectable ecosystem. While all of this is known, I think the way we're looking at intellectual property has so far not embraced this discourse, and there's still a certain gap in terms of how we're looking at proprietary rights and what the expectation is from the overarching community in terms of sustainability. With this webinar and with other initiatives that we have started, we hope to bridge the gap, and we hope to offer new insights and ideas as to what can be done from a practical business perspective to unleash the value of intellectual property from a sustainability perspective. OxFirst also has developed an index, a software that helps to measure patent sustainability performance in corporations. And when we saw the data, we were even more alert and extremely worried that we really need to motivate the IP community to change course of action. Our speaker today, Professor Menon, is very well versed to talk about these matters. She has been studying at some wonderful universities, including the University of Oxford, and was also a fellow at the Side Business School, just like me. I was there many years before, and she's now with Cardiff University. And from what I understood, I was really lucky to get hold of her because she's nonstop teaching management. And her current research looks at intellectual property in the circular economy from a sustainability perspective, and asks what she has been observing through her empirical work in terms of how intellectual property can come to grips with the notion of sustainability. before we start, let me see if we found our second speaker meanwhile, but I don't see her on the participants list. So I really think we may have run into a bigger issue than just IP with Amalia Waxman. And it's really unfortunate that big political issues come into play when we talk IP. I would now let you, Shital, share your screen perhaps, so that we can see your presentation in case there's any issue around that. So basically I make you the host, then you can share your screen. Zack. Good. So we are all here. There's any issue, I'll bring the PowerPoint up.
Okay, thank you. Please confirm if you can see my slide.
Yeah, perfect.
Excellent. So I was very delighted when Roya asked me to give this presentation. Just a bit of clarification. I do not belong to the legal community of IP. I look at IP from a business management perspective. So I teach at Cardiff Metropolitan University, primarily strategy, intellectual property, innovation management. So these are the areas of research and interest to me. I stumbled upon this relevance of IP and circular economy primarily because I started looking at circular economy for electric vehicle batteries in my research. And the acronym of my research is IP for circular economy, that is IP for CE. So as a part of my project, I had the opportunity to speak to organizations who are trying to understand how do they transition to circular economy, but particularly for electric vehicle batteries. And during this research, there were some interesting questions about the role that IP can play. And so that's the kind of a jump off point for me in terms of exploring how IP can actually help businesses to transition to circular economy. So I'll just move on to the next slide. So the agenda for today is just to give you a brief introduction of what is circular economy and why is circularity so important and so relevant. But more importantly, which I assume will be the interest for a majority of you in the audience, is how might IP actually impact circular economy? And that's something that's very close to my interest, research interest. Again, I look at it from an IP management perspective, but I would be more than happy to get some views from the legal perspective in terms of how IP actually impacts or influences circular economy. And then, of course, concluding with some takeaways. So, of course, linear economy, or which is currently the existing or the dominant industrial paradigm, which is where we take raw materials, natural resources to make products and services. And then those products and services are used by us as consumers. And then when we deem them not fit enough for us to use, we perceive that as waste. So that's a typical trajectory of the industrial economy where you take, make, use, and then dispose. But of course, we are moving towards, and not just moving now, we've actually made significant progress in terms of transitioning towards circular economy. And I would like to sort of help you understand when it comes to the definition. Circular economy is all about using as little resources as possible for as long as possible, and in the process, extracting as much value from that resource, with the end goal being that we are minimizing waste. So this kind of paradigm, a circular economy, comes within the broader umbrella of sustainability. So if Amalia was here, she would have probably talked about what is sustainability. And the sustainability concept is all about keeping the people, planet, and profit collectively. So organizations don't just look at profit-centric, but they look at the people and the planet element as well. So within that subset comes circular economy, which is a sort of an industrial system, or a way that the economy works, where we use resources very carefully, but we use resources for as long as possible and extract as much value as possible. And so that sort of transitions your linear economy from a purely take, make, use, and dispose kind of perspective to thinking about, before you think of something as waste, could it potentially be reused, or could it potentially be repaired? If I cannot do that, could I return the product and it can be broken down into its functional elements so it can be used as a resource rather than extracting virgin raw materials from the earth? So it's this argument of thinking about how can I use a product for as long as possible? And then when it reaches the end of life, is there a second life or a third life that we can use for the product? So it's this kind of transition that we are looking from a purely linear economy to a circular economy. So again, just schematically, when we look at resources that go into manufacturing, which are then distributed and used, and which see the end of life, that is its end of first life, when users such as you and I don't deem that product as useful anymore to us, we think of it as waste. But the circular economy paradigm says that perhaps there is more to it than just waste. Could it be reused? Could it be repaired? Could it be remanufactured, refurbished? Could we recycle it? So all of this is with the intent that we keep the resource in use for as long as possible, make the best out of the resource rather than go back to mining more of the resource from the earth.
Shital, if I may add here, I think this is so important what you're saying. We had a project actually in this area, and I learned the terminology urban mining.
Yes.
And I always thought you source for valuable resources by going to mines, but they said, no, 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 we are sourcing for valuable resources in trash.
Yes.
And there was a lot of valuables that my clients was able to extract from mobile phone trash. And it was on the situation, we looked at the UN data and we saw how much trash we are accumulating with all of our electronic gadgets, with our 5 phones per person, which we throw away after 2 years or 3 years. We don't really know what to do with all of this stuff. And you can buy this at a really low cost, and they develop technology to extract valuables from that, and obviously had it patented. They were venture capital funded, and they made quite good money while doing good. So it was a typical case of doing business while doing good. Before they entered the market, you would basically have some very primitive technology in terms of just burning stuff up. It was awful. And it wasn't just about helping and fulfilling the United Nations dream world. It was a very concrete business, and it was environmentally friendly, and it made them tons of money in the licensing deals. So I think what you're seeing, I think it's great you're saying it, because it's both really. It's on the one hand side a sustainability responsibility, but on the other side, it is also a business opportunity. And I think how we can fiddle in the IP element, that's the challenging part of it. So
Absolutely.
very valuable. Thank you.
Absolutely. And as a business person, so I teach in the management domain. And so we see a lot of promising new business models that are emerging. So there is ample economic opportunity to play around in the circular economy. And so it's interesting, obviously, to see what role could IP play in this kind of complex, loopy economy. And so, of course, I don't want to delve too much into it. I will be sharing these slides, but it's interesting to see when it comes to, expanding life of products and its parts, what role does reuse, repair, refurbish, remanufacturing, and repurposing actually make? In fact, these are the strategies that are more incentivized compared to recycling, which has been historically the most widely adopted strategy when a waste comes, when you encounter waste. But it's now the argument that can be transitioned to reuse, repair, refurbish, remanufacturing, as opposed to recycling and then disposal. And then, of course, more influencing consumer behavior, where can you rethink? Do you want to actually unnecessarily buy a product? Can you reduce your demands for certain products? So it's that kind of an argument. We are moving more towards that part of the pyramid where we can alter consumer behavior, but also leverage the economic opportunities that come through these 5 Rs, reuse, repair, refurbish, remanufacturing. And then, of course, why circular economy? So it's
Exactly.
circularity.
These are, yes, these are numbers are really important. I think the audience, this is really the key point. This is a huge opportunity for business also. It's not just nice. Great data. Okay, I shut up now.
Circular economy, of course, is not just so when we are talking about a business use case, it's the argument that it contributes to reducing carbon emissions, it helps in reducing landfill waste, it helps in all of those things. Of course, there is an environmental benefit. But if I have to position that to a business community, to the IP community, of course, there's a potential of generating $4.5 trillion of economic opportunities through very innovative ways of managing waste, creating employment, stimulating innovation in the economy. Obviously, with a transition to net increase in jobs by 2030, potential net increase in jobs through the emergence of new business models that focus on repair, reuse, remanufacturing, business sharing models, as well as servitized models. And then, of course, a potential material cost savings, because if you are reusing some materials or resources for as long as possible, needless to say, you are mining less, you are extracting less virgin materials, and you are reusing what is already there in the economy. And so there are potential of $700 billion worth of savings, especially in fast moving consumer goods and electronics. And that kind of, that sort of makes a very economic use case for incorporating circular economy in businesses. Now, of course, from a policy perspective, we have major economies which have done a lot from a policy perspective to give push to circular economy. Of course, the European Union has been at the forefront when it comes to policy, ambitious policy push for circularity, followed by the UK. But we are also seeing initiatives by other major economies which are looking at making circularity at the heart of businesses. So what I'm trying to say is circular economy is no longer this academic, theoretical construct, but something that businesses are now actually adopting moving forward. And so it's interesting, and this is where the main point comes, which would be of interest to the audience, is what role can IP play in circular economy? And so if we are transitioning from a linear to a circular economy, needless to say, and there is no argument that IP incentivizes owners. So companies that patent, they copyright, they trademark new innovations, there is the IP element which strongly incentivizes owners to incentivize in terms of investment in sustainable innovations, better products. So obviously, if you are looking at reusing for a long time, I would like products to be highly durable. So using it for 20, 30 odd years. But developing such materials requires research. Ease of reuse. So can the product at the end of its life be reused? Is the product amenable to recyclability? All of this requires that we are able to develop better products. And so IP incentivizes such innovative activities. And then, of course, you have to transition your business model from a very linear to a circular business model, where you're trying to get these loops of repair, recycle, remanufacture. And obviously, if you are trying to stop extracting raw materials, you need to change the way you are sourcing materials, the way you are manufacturing, the way you're distributing, and the kind of services that you're offering so that consumers use the products for a long time. But at the end of life, there is tangible second, third life to products. So obviously, there is a need to change business models, and IP certainly incentivizes in all of this. But there's also a flip argument, and this is where my research interests actually come in. So while nobody is debating that IP incentivizes owners, it's also interesting to think of, could IP potentially interfere with third parties? So third parties are organizations that are not actually the IP owners, but they need to interface with IP owners when it comes to a circular economy. So if you are manufacturing something, but at the end of life, you need recyclers, refurbishers, you need repairs, these are typically third parties that are not IP owners. And so how could IP potentially play a role in these kind of business models that are emerging around reuse, repair, remanufacture, and refurbishing or reselling? So this is the primary crux of what I would like to sort of pick your brains on today. So repair, recycling, refurbishing, these are very key central activities if we have to promote circular economy. And this is not what I am claiming. This is what policy push requires. if we want to make sure that we are being very frugal when it comes to resource utilization and also having innovative business models around that. But current IP rules may stand in the way when these activities are not conducted by or not done without the consent of IP owners. So I would like to walk you through some cases. Again, I'm not the legal expert, but I would like to leave you with more questions to think about it. So we have this argument that repairing patented products is generally permitted under the exhaustion doctrine. However, activities involving reconstruction, modification often entail patent infringement. Now, the issue is this line between what is considered repairing and reconstruction or modification is getting difficult to define. And it's often left to national courts on how they interpret permitted repairs. That is, what activities could be done for a patented product, what activities could be conducted by a third party, and which ones are actually prohibited. And this often results in controversial outcomes. Now, legal repairing of patented products is limited to their normal lifespan. But what is the legislative definition of normal lifespan of products? And this interpretation is often left open to patent holders. So I've left some resources for you to sort of take a look at a later point. But there was an interesting study done by the European Parliamentary Research Service, which says that consumers are complaining that products break down faster than usual, and repairing them is often very costly, difficult to manage because it's difficult to arrange for spare parts, and sometimes it's even impossible. So if there is a government push on consumers that you should use products for as long as possible, but if businesses are developing products which don't have much longevity, it's sort of contradicting what we want to do from a policy push perspective and what's happening from a demand or a market perspective. So I'm sure many of you must be knowing about the John Deere case, which was a right to repair kind of case, where the John Deere litigation involved a consolidated antitrust case brought on by several farmers in the US. And they brought the case against the company. Now, the plaintiffs claimed that John Deere, which is a traditional tractor manufacturer, monopolizes repair and maintenance of its agricultural equipments by restricting access to the diagnostic software and the repair tools. So this often limits repairing to authorized dealers. And so what the farmers are contending is that this increases costs of repair and limited options for farmers. This case is interesting because it brought on these debates about right to repair, which the EU has been quite at the forefront in terms of right to repair movement. So this has brought an interesting debate about the right to repair and how do companies actually use IP when it comes to controlling repair ecosystems. Or I would go one step further and say, how do companies use IP to even control the circular ecosystem? Because circular is all of these loops that come out when we want the product not to become waste, but bring it back into the system and use it more. So some of the key issues for the John Deere case was that farmers accusing John Deere of restricting independent repair shops and farmers from accessing repair resources, often leading to reliance on expensive but authorized dealers. John Deere defended its stance by saying that repair tools and diagnostic software is protected by IPR. Interestingly, these technological protection measures, the TPMs, or as we call it, the digital locks, it is increasingly becoming a very powerful form of protecting technology because I'm sure you must be aware, products these days have got such intricate integration of computers with software. So and this entire system is then protected by IP, and then it is integrated into product design and function. So these have implications when it comes to repairing such products or remanufacturing such products. John Deere argued that allowing unrestricted access to proprietary software embedded within the equipment could infringe their IP and expose them to safety and liability risks. In 2023 November, a federal judge ruled, denied John Deere's motion to dismiss and allowed litigation to progress. So the interesting implication or the question that I would like to ask you to think about from a circular economy perspective is that what could be the impediments to establishing a secondary market? So if you're thinking about repair, refurbishings, remanufacturing, what could be the impediments? And again, here the implications are more on non-IP owners. So what are those implications? Another sort of interesting argument of this reconstruction, repair versus remanufacturing and refurbishing argument. So there have been instances where manufacturers argue that extensive refurbishing or extensive remanufacturing of critical or patented parts often leads to a new product, which is not allowed under patent exhaustion. So this was an older case, the Jazz Photo Corp versus Eastman Kodak, where Jazz Photo had used single-use cameras, so used single-use cameras which were refurbished and sold as new. And Eastman Kodak held patents on the camera and claimed that Jazz Photo's actions of refurbishing actually constituted patent infringement. Now, Kodak argued that refurbishment crossed that line of permissible repair to reconstruction of a patented product. So again, that kind of thinking of how we are interpreting repair, permissible repair versus reconstruction. Now, the International Trade Commission was in favor of Kodak, asserting that Jazz Photo's activities actually infringed Kodak's patents. And so again, some implications just to think about. The legal complexities around refurbished patented products and how such circular activities could actually infringe patent rights. And more importantly, how do we define or shape these boundaries between repair versus reconstruction? Because it will often impact industries where remanufacturing, product life extension is actually a very standard practice, and they are coming up with innovative business models, but it could sort of clash when it comes to these activities. Another fairly recent case was the Lexmark and Impression Products case, where it revolved around remanufacturing and patent exhaustion. So Lexmark manufactured and patented both toner cartridges as well as the technology which controls the toner levels. Now, Impression Products, who is a third-party remanufacturer, not the holder of the IP, but a third-party remanufacturer, bought used cartridges from Lexmark's return program from customers and then refilled and resold them. Now, Lexmark contended that it retained patent rights because the cartridges were sold under this return program because of single-use restriction. So the single-use restriction essentially meant that neither customers nor third parties could legally refill cartridges. The US Supreme Court ruled in favor of Impression Products, stating that once a patented product has been sold with or without restrictions, the patent holder's rights are exhausted. Now, as someone with legal expertise, something to think about in terms of, this kind of ruling could set a precedence for remanufacturers being sued for patent infringement in cases of remanufacturing. So that would be interesting. Does that actually translate into weakened ability of original equipment manufacturers or OEMs to impose post-sale restrictions on patented products? Now, interestingly, even copyrights, and not just purely patents or design patents, but copyright as well over instruction manuals, which are required for repairing and remanufacturing, schematics, software embedded within devices, that is the TPMs, they may create obstacles to repair and remanufacturing. So interestingly, a 2017 case of Ford Global Technologies and New World International, where Ford sued New World International, which was a third-party auto parts manufacturer, for infringing copyrighted auto part designs and design patents by selling and producing and selling remanufactured versions of Ford's body parts. Now, the claim was that remanufactured parts constituted derivative works because of replication of Ford's copyrighted designs. And the courts ruled in favor of Ford, stating that remanufactured parts based on Ford's copyrights actually constituted copyright and design patent infringement. Another case, fairly recent, is the Apple and the Corellium case, which I think was settled out of court, where Apple sued Corellium for creating a virtual version of its iOS to aid security testing and research. Now, please bear in mind that Corellium was actually not doing anything to do with repair, but they were reproducing Apple's iOS and modifying it, which Apple then argued was unauthorized derivative works. So while Corellium was not focused on repairing, this case particularly could illustrate how modifying, duplicating copyrighted software for the purposes of product repurposing, remanufacturing, or repair could potentially be considered as infringement. Now, the courts ruled in favor of Corellium on fair use exceptions. But of course, Apple had taken the case further. So I'm not sure, it's not still clear what has happened, but they probably would have settled out of court. But this argument of fair use exceptions on software, copyrighted software, could be an argument that repairers and remanufacturers might want to consider. So I will close this session with some key takeaways, and potentially please think of this session as building narratives between businesses and the legal community about circularity. So businesses are interested in transitioning towards a circular economy. They are developing interesting business models. They are being innovative when it comes to making products more circular. But what role could potentially the legal community play in that? So businesses are no longer contemplating circularity. So it's not a matter of if circular economy picks up, but it's when, and that's going to happen quite soon. So how can the IP community actually contribute to support this transition to circular economy? I'm aware that you are supposed to ask me the questions, but I would like to pick your brains on how could IP community potentially contribute to support this transition to circular economy? How can IP become an enabler for circularity? And more importantly, how can non-IP owners thrive in a circular economy? So thank you very much for patiently listening to my session. And I will be happy to take questions, but more importantly, I would be happy to engage in conversation.
No, thank you, Shital. Very, very helpful presentation, and very interesting that you went to the case law already. From what I gather from what you said, that you can't really make an objection at the moment in court by saying, look, it is a matter of sustainability, therefore we should have access or some privileges to the patents on a favorable terms. So something like a front objection, fair, reasonable, non-discriminatory objection does not really exist for patents in the circular economy. Do you see here a clash of paradigms? Does the patent system possibly hinder the circular economy, in your opinion?
So I think there are two ways to looking at it, and it depends on the perspective of the organization. So definitely IP owners tremendously benefit from patent protection and IP protection having this kind of system, because we've seen a new kind of IPC code, the YO2 code systems, which actually codify green innovations in that category. So yes, I'm not debating that patent owners do not benefit, but it's just this argument, looking at case law and looking at precedents. Is that something to be concerned about for businesses having such type of models where they are looking at repairing, they're looking at remanufacturing discarded products and trying to bring it back into the system?
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me this way that there's a wonderful article by Irene where she talks about putting a square through a circular hole, where there's a misfit between what traditional IP law has been, which was for the linear economy. It has traditionally been designed around the linear economy. And so around circularity, there are some, I do see potential misfits. So that's something that could be interesting to see how IP laws are interpreted going forward.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the challenge between patents and access to technology is not new. We have had a very intense debate on patents and access to medicines. Do you think this is the same situation, just with different words, or how do you see that?
I think patents with medicines has been a question of access primarily.
Mm-hmm.
And in the emerging economies, particularly access to patent protected medicines. Um, I would not go so far into making any parallels when it comes to patents in pharmaceuticals and medicines with circular economy, primarily because in terms of intensity and relevance and severity, obviously medicines and pharma and access to medicines is something that has been going on for quite some time, and that is irrespective of circular economy or sustainability. But these new kind of paradigms that are coming up, where you are not allowing other ecosystem actors to actually participate in circular economy because of the way certain laws are interpreted. I think it's all about asking, is the IP law up to date with the sustainable development goals? If you want to achieve that, are they in alignment with that? That could have potential implications in pharma, but certainly in other industrial sectors as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are there any positives to cite, sort of like where patents have been the enabler or have made the circular economy possible in the first place, or are they more the troublemakers here?
Oh,
What
again,
is your take
I still
on that?
contend with that IP has been a very strong enabler for
Yeah.
companies that want to be innovative when it comes to coming up with interesting sort of products which are long lasting, interesting materials,
Mm-hmm.
um, interesting business models. So IP has been uh, quite an enabler. It's just this question of non-IP owners and how do they, and these businesses that are coming up, these other actors that are coming up, how do they, what role do they play, and how does IP facilitate that?
Yeah. So basically, you're saying there's a certain mismatch in terms of how business operates and how the patent system conceptualizes how business is supposed to operate.
Yes.
And that is a drama I'm seeing throughout so many areas where I'm thinking like how 19th century patent system looked at business was there's a producer and there's a consumer, there's a linear value chain. And in this linear value chain, the producer needs to have an incentive to produce and the consumer then buys for that. And if you live in this world, the patent system is really mirroring business. But in a world of open innovation, in a world of circularity, and in a world where value is very often co-created by many different players, the patent system is a bit stuck because that's not how it tried to map business. And one thing which keeps striking me is that we urgently need to have more conversations with business people. So the legal community starts to map a legal system that actually reflects what's going on in business. In my opinion, ever since the beginning, I think the internet is a disruptive technology, a massive game changer, and it had a massive change on how business operates. And patent and copyright systems just haven't really been able to figure this out, to say, okay, if this is how things work now, what do we need to do to adapt? That is where we are still, if you're lucky, I mean, territorial limitation of the patent system. Yay. Was a really good, helpful concept in the 19th century when it was a big deal to get from England to Paris. You had to ship for hours to get there. But in an era where with a mouse click, you're connected to someone on the other part of the world, that's a bit less clear from this already territoriality of the patent system. So I really think what I'm hearing from you here is a much bigger challenge of bringing, weirdly enough, the law of business really in line with business.
Yeah.
This is where it kind of gets lost a bit, and it's not. And it's not even about taking sides or saying patent system is good or bad or acting in such like simplified constructions. It's literally of saying, if you're trying to enable business and be an incentive for business stuff, you need to understand who you're catering to and what does business want and how does business operate. And in an era of open innovation, of co-establishment of value, of circularity of value, of recycling outdated products that otherwise have no usage, that was not how we thought patents, how the world would map patents. So I think this is a huge challenge to think about. And I wonder who will be motivated to pick the question up, because from what I have seen, the legal community is quite self-content discussing recent judgments and how the judge thought about this or that question. And this is in and by itself extremely exciting. And then to say, well, why don't you think outside the box, really? Nobody is paying them for that. So nobody is really picking up the question. And that's an issue. It's a big issue. And the management people are saying, I live in more important spheres. Whatever the lawyers do, let them do. So who picks up the question? And then I would also like to say that I don't know if you have noticed it, but there have been initiatives now basically to aggregate patents and to pool patents together for the sake of sustainability. And I have two big question marks around that. So ages ago, I did a paper on a climate change mitigating patent pool, which was called to life following a World Economic Forum meeting. And it was all under open innovation paradigms, all the buzzwords you want to hear. The problem was just it was the patents that were in this pool were all fairly irrelevant. Everybody basically donated what they didn't need themselves, and no one else needed it either. So it was a trash in, trash out problem. And eventually that thing stopped again and closed down. So, and now we see again this type, another pool has emerged. And I wonder also, pools usually aim to serve a solution, aim to offer a solution when you need many patents on one single technology. For example, for 4G standards, if they're all just pulled together, you take one license, you have your 4G access problem resolved. I'm not totally sure that this is the problem with sustainability and IP, because you're not really dealing here with lots of patents on one and the same technology space, but on many different complementary technology spaces. So I'm not sure the pooling has a massive value proposition. Well, Shital, if you were in power, what would you change? Where would you get started to make things work to ensure the circular economy really prospers? Where would you start?
I think the starting point is the last question that I put on my slide, is working together with the business community and the legal community. It's just that back and forth of how do we interpret the law to set such a precedent that helps in supporting such sort of circular practices. And so it's not, I mean, it's a tricky question, actually. It's a loaded question, so it's difficult to answer.
But I don't know if you were to break it down, like what should we change? Should we change the doctrine of patent exhaustion? Should we find operational aspects like management steps? Should companies just say, under circumstances, we don't think it makes sense to assert? Or could there be a public interest objection in proceedings, let's say sustainability objection in proceedings, by saying, look, under these circumstances, they serve to reduce CO2 emissions, or they serve to recycle tons of things. Therefore, we can't enforce patents as usual, or I don't know, what would be the biggest leverage in your opinion? I mean,
yeah, it is again this significant overhaul of the way IP is enforced.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires bold measures by people in power. And of course, I'm not a legal expert, but that is what the business wants, that there is some sort of leeway when it comes to interpreting IP that supports such new business models, which have never been conceived of, never been thought of. That's the only way moving forward, because if we have to achieve our net zero targets, if we have to come to 1.5 degrees at pre-industrial levels, we need drastic measures. And so all stakeholders, including IP community, has to play that role. That would be my piece.
How would we motivate them to care?
I think it starts with the promising people who've joined our webinar. So I do see someone raising a hand for a question. Do you mind if we take the question?
Yeah, but it's not. I just wanted to see if they had, like, if you have a recording or if they can get the slides. So it's not really, does anyone have a real question rather than if you can get the slides? Or comments or observations? Or... No? We have an audience with no comments. Maybe they fell asleep. The audience with no comments is always tricky. You never know what happened. Guys, any comments, observations, criticism, attacks, insights we haven't thought of?
I see someone who's raised their hand in the participants.
Yeah, I see that too. Let's hope. Hopefully it's not again, if you can just see one hand raised. If this is the software, and I don't see who has raised their hand. Okay, Muhammudsa Edwin. Okay, can you? I think you can speak. We have unmuted you, Muhammudsa Edwin. Or maybe you can type your comments in the chat. Oh yeah, we can hear you. Yay.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I am a legal practitioner in Uganda, East Africa, and about 3 weeks ago, a garbage dump site collapsed and killed about 35 people.
Oh my God.
In Uganda, and this was the result of failure to recycle and failure to reinvent or recreate or refurbish the products. It has taken us the tragedy of that nature to be able to understand the importance of moving from a linear economy, like you say, to a circular economy. But even after the tragedy, we are rushing to find a company to decompose the rubbish as opposed to recycling it. In a matter of weeks, we're already fighting to find an entity. Now, I am so glad I've been part of this because I'd not seen the angle in which IP would come in to mitigate that problem, both from the starting end, where we're saying that we should make more sustainable products, and at the very end where we're saying we should recycle, refurbish, or invent the products. I am so glad, but I'd also like to say that the challenges of the products that are made in the third world countries differ from the nature of the products that are made in the first world countries. Most of our waste material is organic. How do we maximize the ability of intellectual property in recycling some of these products that are more organic than the synthetic products? And for me, I'm very interested in the discussion, in the sense that it is a line of solution we have not explored as a country. We are only looking at how we can do away with the waste product. We recently advertised disposal of electronic waste material. It is the first time since the creation of this nation that we have attempted to dispose electronic waste material. Yet we have a population of 50 million people who at least 3/4 have a phone or use an electronic product. So for me, I'm thankful for this discussion, but I would want to have it on a more detailed level to understand how I can benefit my community and regurgitate this information to the people who influence policy so that we can see how to change certain things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the insights and for your perspective. I'm sorry to hear of the tragedy and that's unfortunately not a one-off incident. We are hearing of many such incidences where there have been explosions at landfill sites because of dumping of such potent products into landfill, which have explosive capabilities. So yes, we would be happy to sort of take this conversation further. And if you want, we could connect over email and see if we can have a discussion more in terms of some common point between what you and we would like to do. I do active research on IP and circular economy. So I would be happy to pick your brains and see if we can do something.
Do we have further comments? Do you think IP exceptions in the current state are sufficient to protect third-party actors? And it is only a question of interpretation, or do you believe legislative reform is required in order to promote circularity? No, I think it's a matter of reform, but what do you say, Shital?
I mean, because it is still at the nascent stage of the way IP is interfacing with circular economy, it has always started because it's at a lower level right now or at a nascent level. It is currently looking at IP exceptions and then probably moving on to interpretation. But I think going forward, there has to be reform because reform is the only way we can have mass scale differences to promote circularity. Purely exceptions or interpretations are very nuanced and it's all subject to the patent holder and the national courts of how they interpret. But not, I think legislative reforms is the more sustainable way of thinking about sustainability.
Yeah, I also think in addition to that, I'm very much into the whole idea of management rather than legislating around, because it just takes so long until you have a legislative reform. That's like a long shot. Anything that means changing substantive IP law is a long shot. I think there's a certain responsibility for corporations for voluntary commitments and for pledges and for making clear what they're ready to commit to on their own, rather than just say, you know, that's how it is. So I think this is really like a matter of of voluntary commitment also from companies. And then there's another one question from Eduardo Souza. Our colleague may benefit from the work of Günther Pauli in the blue economy. There's information there he may be able to meet. And then we got the email addresses. Okay, I'll not. And then Rob says, what specific reforms are you suggesting?
I think it's more about this conversation of what the IP or the legal community can actually. So I'm the business representative. So we bring what I research are the business problems when it comes to transitioning to circular economy, and IP has been often flagged as one of those. So in fact, I would like to flip the question and ask, what do you think would be the best way of sort of supporting businesses if they want to transition? That's primarily where I would like to pick the brains of the IP community.
For me, it's about voluntary commitments, pledges, about introducing IP in companies' corporate social responsibility activities, about better interaction at the corporate level between IP units and general management. I also think there's still a huge low and mid-income country angle to that. Even though sustainability concerns developed and developing countries at the same level, the fact is also that pollution hits the developing world very, very hard. Many key technologies are not available, and megacities in the south are particularly an issue. So I think we still are facing, even in the context of sustainability, a massive international development issue also, which cannot be seen separately from bigger global governance and development issues. I also think this is a very emerging topic. We have heard for decades the issue around access to medicines. And I think access to medicines is somehow different because this is a question of the poorest of the poor having access to medicines. But when it comes to net zero goals, the air in London is also not the best, yeah. So this is not just getting it to Africa or something like that. This is really a matter of global challenges, and goodwill and good governance will be really important. And the first thing I think which we need to understand is that we need to raise appetite for the question, you know, and raise motivation to do something about it. As long as we don't care, nobody is going to bother. As long as it's not seen as an issue, well, why would we bother? And I find it a bit surprising that we have so much regulation coming out now around sustainability from Brussels, from the European Commission, from here, from British government, none of which link the topic to intellectual property. And that's the same type of oversight that I have seen in my entire IP career, that we have sort of like overarching big goals and God knows what in the world. And then there's the IP nerds, and people don't really know what we are about. Do we mean internet protocol, or what are these guys really doing? International property, what do I know? And just no government has ever been elected on the basis of good or bad patent politics, I think. It's just a non-topic, quite frankly. Unless there's a real outlier, I don't know, Apple versus Samsung, huge damages all of a sudden. Then the world goes, oops, so what happened? But then that's forgotten again, and then we just move on and nobody cares about IP really. And I think it's this blind spot, which is also seen here, where people don't really see it's an issue. And as long as it's not seen as an issue, it's kind of like not picked up really. So it's this inertia really associated with lack of motivation to engage. So this is a bit, I think, the issue. And I think the work that Shital is doing and that I'm trying to do, that's maybe a way to get things going, and it's great. Did we cover all your questions? I see there's still another 9 questions. Provide them a value proposition. Momental. What did you write? Scope for the whole. Okay. Provide them a Yeah, no, I think we covered it. And I would like to thank you all for being here today. I hope Amalia is okay. I haven't heard from her since the webinar started, so I just really hope she's doing well. Professor Menon, thank you very much for your marvelous contribution. Also very encouraging to see women on the march in IP. Please join us for our next webinars. We are plotting on something for the US elections, because we think there's something to talk about the US elections and intellectual property, no matter how they are being decided. And then we're also having a conference in Oxford in early January, where we will be looking at the relationship of the Unified Patent Court and the English judiciary, which is evolving, so to say, with the relevant judges also joining us from the UPC and from England and Wales. And yeah, please bear with us. And we would love to, since we are all about new ways of doing business, we hope to have user-driven contributions also. So if you want to contribute to a webinar, or if you have ideas or suggestions, please get in touch. We don't want to have linearity. We want to have circularity. And we want to co-create the experience. So please make us happy. Get in touch. Propose, suggest the topics. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you very much for spending this afternoon with us today. And big thanks to Shital for a lovely talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.